What's going on, everybody? Had a comment in one of my other videos, how come you don't have a good logo or music to introduce your videos? Because that's stupid. I'm just a regular person with a regular truck. First of all, I don't have the time, and I'll admit it, the knowledge to do that kind of stuff. But people click on these videos because, I'm doing the same kind of projects that they likely might have, and I just want to be informative, so. Plus, I don't want to have to worry about copyright infringement if I have, lead into this with a Metallica song. I don't want to have to worry about all those disclaimers, and I might miss it, and then I'm stuck with a freaking lawsuit or something stupid. But anyways, Cummins update time. I left you guys last time. I was talking about this power steering leak I had down here. Turns out it was a little bit of the low pressure side, and I got a nice brand new line on there, but it's actually coming out of the input seal, which it's fairly common on a lot of things from this generation. Doesn't matter, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, they all had a very similar steering gear design. That's the high pressure on the left, low pressure on the bottom, and this input seal here was prone to leak. It's actually not too bad on a scale of 1 to 10. It's enough to be annoying. Marked its territory a little bit on the ground. You can see below. Well, actually, that's a little bit of fuel from this project that I just did, but I'll go into that just here in a second. But so, as a preventative, I carry a quart or two of just tranny fluid with me. Just the cheap stuff from Walmart. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You just do not want to let these power steering pumps run dry. It's a hydraulic pump. You run them dry, you get air in them, but you're going to damage the internals. And then, you got to, for these, it's kind of a pain because it's connected to the vacuum pump here, so you have to disconnect that, and it's just a pain to get at. It's a pain to get underneath, and I don't want to do it. So just keep adding fluid, and eventually at some point I'll probably have to pay somebody to do that, just because the way to get this thing off, that's a 30 seconds pin, I believe. So you got to drive it out one way, and it's probably been in there since the thing was put together, so it's probably really stuck in there. Then you got that lock ring, and there's a spanner nut. There's 2 holes in it, so I don't have a spanner wrench, and I can't justify buying one for a project I'm going to do once. So I got to do that. But what I just got done doing is the lift pump for the fuel system. I was leaking fuel there. Now the thing that's really nice about that this design, I'll show you here on the old pump. This is the original. It's been in the truck since it was assembled. This design has been around since time immemorial on these vehicles. Not just these Rams, but on literally everything. On your carbureted small blocks, big blocks that uses a mechanical lift pump. This is it right here. This is the dog's nuts. This is they're almost all identical. Okay, what you have is it mates into the block like that, and they're driven off the camshaft, and when the cam comes around, it hits that little area right there. Nice little polished spot. But there's a lobe that hits that, pushes that little lever up and down, which drives a plunger, and there's a one-way valve in here, suction there where this clamp is, and then supply. Now what was happening, and this is how you know these things are starting to fail. If you know what you're looking at, the vehicles will always tell you when they're sick. See that right there? Focus, you piece of garbage. What that is, there's a weep hole right there. Okay, and made in England. I suppose that's better than made in China. Anywho, the new one that's in there is Bosch. It says made in Germany, by the way. There's a weep hole here because there's just this little plunger that's driven by this tool, and then what happens is if fuel is only supposed to come in on one side, then it gets pushed out the other side. There's a one-way valve in here. Now if it starts getting fuel in this bottom part of this bowl here, you'll start weeping fuel, hence the name weep hole. Now it's been doing it for a while, and it was getting worse. Now the reason I knew I had to just hurry up and get this thing done, and I was starting to lose prime. I'd start in the morning, crank. Wait a minute, don't just burn up my starter, and I wasn't. But I was losing prime, and I was also leaking fuel out of there pretty bad, and it was dripping down out of the back of the starter there. and that's not good. You know, you're cranking because you're losing prime and you're dripping fuel onto the back of a hot starter. It's just not a good thing. It's not a good thing. Yes, it's diesel. It won't ignite like gas, but you know, bear with, you know, you get what I'm trying to say here. I was losing prime, so it was time to get her done. It was a fairly straightforward job. You know, I've never done one on a 12 valve like this. I've done one on a you know, P7100 pump. This on a second gen Dodge. I'd never done one on one of these, but anyways, fairly straightforward. Now in this one, the top of the pump here is slightly different. There's not a place to grab onto with a pair of channel locks, so in the future maybe just a tad different. But on the old one, you clamp down below that fuel supply line there. The nut there on the fuel line is a 14 mil. The area below that would be a 17 mil, and that is in the book. I mean, it is a Bosch pump, go figure. Or the old one in that case was supplied in England, so metric. And then I had to steal that that elbow there from the old pump, and then the two bolts that hold it into the block there are just 10 mil. So now on the old one right there, where that fatter part is below where the fuel supply nut is, that's a 17 mil on this pump. Right here, that's 17 mil. Sometimes you got to put an open-ended wrench on that. Otherwise, if this guy right here is really stuck, you'll just turn this head. So you put a 17 mil on it, breaker loose, it should come right off. That suction supply elbow, that thing was a son of a bitch to get off. Had some red Loctite on it. Excuse me. And then up here, these wires are in a terrible spot for this job, but you just gotta bear with it. That there is the bleeder, the fuel bleeder. That's a 17 mil as well. So you back that off just so you could, you know, finagle the thing in and out of the pump. I mean, don't go yanking on it and bending it, because that'll wreck your afternoon if you go ahead and damage that thing to the point where you can't put it back on. Once you get her all buttoned up, just a little liquid thread tape there and there. Give that primer lever a couple 2-3 pushes till you start spurting fuel out right here. Tighten it up and you're good. Now on a pump that's operating properly, that plunger in there, like I said, it's a one-way valve, so you don't have to worry about losing prime. So guys, and gals, if you have a mechanical 12 valve Cummins in anything, whether it's a generator, a boat, your truck, and you are having to crank cold start, if it's assuming it's not a compression issue or a heater grid issue, because these do not have glow plugs if you're in a cold weather environment, assume that it is the plunger in here and you're losing prime. If you're losing prime, that's what's doing it. And if you are losing prime, you are very likely weeping fuel out of here when it's running. Goes to also show you, to keep your engine relatively clean, because if this thing is caked in grime and grease and dirt and it's just coated, and your fuel is just going to add more liquid to the grime that's on there, you might not see that it's weeping until it totally fails, stops pumping fuel, and then it leaves on the side of the road. Or worse, the reason that I was really motivated to get this done is what happened, and I'll spare you the physics lesson, but this high pressure injector pump, well, relatively high for this engine, if you have vacuum suction, you're going to get cavitation inside the pump. Now these pumps use the fuel as a lubricant and a coolant, and you do not want to have air in this system anywhere, especially in the injector pump, because it'll, like I said, it'll cavitate internally and it will very quickly destroy the pump. The other thing is, if you're getting air in the system, the injectors use the fuel as not only a coolant and lubricant, but it also acts as a cushion on the needle on the injector tip. So as the fuel pressure drops off and the injector starts to close, even though this is happening in fractions of a second, that fuel that's in there keeps and buffers the tip of the injector from going metal to metal inside of the body, which can cause the injector tip to crack, which will turn it into a blowtorch, because instead of metering fuel in, it's just spraying it in. You get a fire on top of your piston. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but that will very, very quickly cause catastrophic piston damage. You will start melting metal. So anyways, what I'm trying to get at here is, if you got a problem with your truck, don't ignore it, because I mean, a $50 part, 30 minutes, and a can of beer is all this job really was. Or you could end up grenading the whole engine. Your choice. Anyways, the last thing I wanted to point out is the clip that's on here. Whoever designed this needs to be thrown out of a helicopter into a shark tank during a thunderstorm or something painful, because this damn thing got me twice. You know, here and here. Yeah, I busted my knuckles before, but I mean, that's not a scrape, that's a freaking stab wound. It got me in my damn thumb too. I know that's gonna hurt tomorrow. Trying to pinch this thing closed, so you know what? Throw that thing away, and I just got a regular 1/4 inch pipe clamp on there, which is what I should have done in the first place, but hey, trying to save. Anyways, haven't done the compressor upgrade because the plate on the back of the turbo has got an O-ring on it that seals the center cartridge from the back of the compressor housing. And once you take that thing off, I don't want to take the risk of it compromising the O-ring, because what can happen is you start now hemorrhaging oil into your compressor side here. The engine could potentially get what's called a runaway when it starts running off its own oil, which means even if you shut the key off, it's just going to continue to run on its own oil, or it will start burning it and consuming it. And if you're not paying attention to your fuel and oil, your oil levels, you're just going to run the thing out of oil. And oil consumption problems are big with those, like 2012 Ford with the 5 liters. I don't know what the heck's the problem with that. I've seen 2 of those in the last week. You know, trading for one looks good, but I mean, she's got a little bit of a knock, and let's do the obvious thing and check the engine oil. So pull it, and it is dry. So they go ahead and pull the plug, and the only oil in the engine was in the filter. So she's done. Goes to show you, check your fluids. Check your oil, check your transmission fluid once in a while, coolant, all that good stuff. I mean, a little preventative maintenance goes a very long way. And these things are not getting any cheaper. And I'm not talking my old POS truck here. I'm talking vehicles in general. I mean, the average truck right now, you're knocking on 30 grand for a work rig before all the factory rebates, and $50,000 for something nice for a gas truck. I mean, I paid $43,000 after the rebates for a Duramax in 05, and I thought that was ridiculous. I mean, my cost to replace that truck now would be right at $50,000 plus. And that's for a regular crew cab truck, nothing fancy about it, cloth seats. So that's all mine is. I mean, you start talking an SLT or a Denali, you better dig deep. They're 70 grand. Ask me how I know. I do it every day. Anyways, I got a couple other projects on the body. It just never stops. But I got a nice hole in here. I dug out the old shit Bondo job that was on there. I'm going to do it right. I got to clean that up a little bit more with the Dremel tool tomorrow. I'm running out of time. I got to get some food on the grill. Got my MacGyver job here. I never claimed to be an electrician. Mechanical stuff, too easy. But this electrical garbage, man, if it ain't leaking or it ain't broken, I can't tell what's wrong with it, and it just pisses me off. My light bar on the front wasn't working. Turns out this stupid relay had got some water in it, so I cleaned it up, put some dielectric grease in there, and taped the dog wall out of it with some electrical tape, and hopefully that does the trick. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section. I check it 2-3 times a day. I'm not trying to be the next YouTube sensation or anything like that, but You know, I've been in this thing down to the bare block. You know, Power Strokes, Duramaxes, Cummins, gas rigs, boats, chainsaws. I mean, anybody got any questions on any of that stuff, you know, go ahead and throw it out there. Be more than happy to answer it, and if I don't know the answer, I'd be more than happy to find the answer for you. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more. Thank you.